She plugged it in before the sun was up, before the coffee, before anything else in the house made a sound. By the time she left for work, dinner was already underway, hours before anyone thought to ask what was for dinner. That's not a small thing. That's not a kitchen gadget. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. The crock pot wasn't sold as convenience. It was sold as survival to millions of women who'd just been told they could work outside the home, as long as dinner still showed up on time. Number 25. Never fail pot roast. 1 packet of onion soup mix, water to cover. That was the entire recipe, printed on the card that came inside every rival crockpot box in 1972. A chuck roast ran 89 cents a pound that year. The onion soup mix cost 19 cents. She'd drop both in before work, and by 6 o'clock the meat pulled apart with a fork, dark gravy pooled underneath, the whole kitchen smelling like Sunday, even on a Tuesday. Critics called it lazy cooking. It was not lazy. It was engineering, turning 8 unattended hours into a meal that never once required her to be in the room. Number 24. Busy Woman's Roast Chicken. This one had a name, a real one, printed by Rival's own test kitchen in Kansas City in 1976. A whole fryer chicken, about 59 cents a pound, went in dry. No water, no soup can. Nothing but the bird and its own fat rendering slow through the afternoon. The skin never crisped. Nobody cared. What came out was so tender it fell off the bone in wet, fragrant strings. The meat basted for 9 straight hours in its own juices. Grandma just called it Tuesday chicken. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 23. Pork chop abracadabra, same test kitchen, same year, 1976. Pork chops at 99 cents a pound, browned quick in a skillet, then lowered into the crock with a can of soup and whatever was left in the vegetable drawer. Rival named it abracadabra because that's exactly what it looked like. Raw, tough shoulder chops going in at 7 a.m. and something unrecognizably tender coming out at 5. Today, a restaurant plates the same idea, braised pork with pon jus, for $24. This was not magic. This was chemistry, and she understood it before anyone gave it a name. Number 22. Cream of Mushroom Company's Coming Chicken Midwest Ranch Homes, 1973. Chicken pieces, a can of cream of mushroom soup at 21 cents, and nothing else, left to simmer down into a thick, pale gravy by dinner time. It was the dish you made when someone was coming over, not because it was fancy, but because it was reliable, and reliability was the highest compliment a 1970s kitchen could pay a guest. This was the beginning of something quieter and more dangerous, too. The can became the recipe. That thread runs through half of what's still ahead on this list. Number 21. Sweet Sour Cocktail Meatballs as Dinner, Suburban Ohio, 1974. Grape jelly at 39 cents a jar, chili sauce at 35, melted together in the crock until they turned into something between a glaze and a gravy, thick enough to cling to a spoon. It was a party recipe, built for toothpicks and paper plates. But on a Tuesday with 5 mouths to feed and $11 left until payday, nobody was precious about which nights deserved which food. She served it over rice and called it dinner. It was dinner. That is not a compromise. That is not progress leaving something behind. That is a woman refusing to waste a good idea just because it was born for a different occasion. Number 20. Working Woman's No Work Pot. Roast. This one is real, pulled straight from an archived recipe card, the kind passed hand to hand before anyone thought to write 1970s nostalgia on it. A rump roast, a packet of onion soup mix, water to cover, cooked on high for 8 to 12 hours. The instructions end with a line so plain it stops you. When you return from work, you will have a delicious tender roast awaiting you. No garnish. No apology. Just a woman who worked a full shift and still refused to let her family eat something thrown together. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. That kind of care never needed a marketing department to be real. Number 19. Beef stroganoff, crockpot-style Midwest kitchens. 1975. Round steak at $1.09 a pound, cut into strips, cooked down slow with a can of cream of mushroom soup until the meat turned soft as butter. Only at the very end did she stir in the sour cream, 49 cents a container, off the heat so it wouldn't break. That single detail separated the women who understood their crock pot from the women who just used it. Today, a bistro plates the same dish, tells you it's Russian aristocracy, and charges $22. Grandma just called it Thursday. Number 18. Swiss steak and tomatoes, rural Midwest and the Deep South, both 1971. A tough round steak, pounded flat with the edge of a plate because nobody owned a meat mallet, dredged in flour, browned hard, then buried under canned tomatoes at 25 cents a can. What happened over the next 7 hours was pure science, whether she called it that or not. The slow heat broke down collagen fibers that no amount of quick pan frying ever could, turning a cut nobody wanted into something that ate like a Sunday roast. That is not progress, what we lost since. That is knowledge, and it left the kitchen the same decade the women who held it went to work. Number 17. Sauerkraut and Kielbasa, Pennsylvania coal country, in the Slavic and German immigrant blocks of Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Chicago. This one belonged to them long before it belonged to anyone else, and it stayed on their tables straight through the 1970s. A ring of kielbasa, about 79 cents a pound, laid over a full jar of sauerkraut with a handful of brown sugar and caraway seed to cut the sharpness. It cooked for hours until the whole house smelled like vinegar and wood smoke, and something older than the appliance it came from. A smell that had crossed an ocean in someone's memory before it ever touched a crock pot. Families who'd lost a language sometimes still had this. A recipe survives in the body long after the words for it are gone. That is not nostalgia. That is inheritance, cooked low for 8 hours, because that's how her mother did it. And her mother before that, on a stove none of them ever owned. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. By the mid-1960s, Campbell's had figured something out that would reshape the American dinner table for the next 50 years. A can of cream of mushroom soup wasn't just soup. It was a sauce base, a thickener, a shortcut, and if they could get it into enough recipe pamphlets, enough church cookbooks, enough test kitchen cards handed out at the grocery store checkout, it would stop being an ingredient and start being a requirement. It worked. By 1970, nearly a third of all American casserole recipes called for a can of condensed soup, not because it tasted better than a scratch bechamel, because a generation of home cooks had been quietly, deliberately taught to believe they couldn't make one without it. They knew things about flour and butter and thyme that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. The can didn't replace her skill. It replaced her confidence in it. Number 16. Chicken and dumplings Appalachia and the rural South, unbroken across the whole decade. A stewing hen, tougher and cheaper than a fryer, about 45 cents a pound, went into the crock whole, with water, a bay leaf, and whatever was left of the celery. Hours later, the meat slid off the bone on its own. That's when the dumplings went in. Flour, buttermilk, a pinch of salt, dropped by the spoonful into broth gone thick and gold, left to steam under the lid until they puffed soft as pillows. Nothing wasted. Not the bones, not the last of the buttermilk going sour in the fridge, not the woman's afternoon, because she wasn't standing over it, she was somewhere else entirely, and dinner cooked itself into being anyway. That's not a recipe. That's a small, stubborn kind of freedom. Number 15. Ham and scalloped potatoes kitchens everywhere, but especially the ones with a Sunday ham still sitting in the icebox come Wednesday. Potatoes, sliced thin at 10 cents a pound, layered in the crock with the last shreds of that ham and a white sauce built from butter, flour, and milk instead of a can. Because sometimes the can was for the busy nights, and this one was for using up what was already paid for. 7 hours later, the potatoes had gone soft and starchy sweet, the ham gone salty and dark at the edges where it met the crock wall. This was not leftovers. This was a second meal wrung deliberately out of the first one, on purpose, by a woman who had already decided nothing in her kitchen got to be wasted twice. Number 14. Spanish rice with hamburger working-class kitchens across the Southwest, and well beyond it, 1972. A single pound of ground beef, 68 cents that year, browned quick and then stretched thin across a full pot of rice, canned tomatoes, green pepper, and onion, left to simmer down until the rice drank up everything around it. 1 pound of meat. 5 plates, sometimes 6. That ratio wasn't an accident. It was arithmetic, done in her head at the meat counter before she ever picked up the package. Modern food blogs call this a one-pot rice bowl now, and charge $14 for the takeout version. Grandma just called it Tuesday because feeding a family on 1 pound of meat wasn't a trend to her. It was Tuesday every single week for as long as it had to be. Number 13. Beef and noodles farm towns across the Midwest, all decade long. Cheap stew beef, cooked down slow until it shredded on its own, then folded through a full bag of egg noodles at 29 cents, everything bathed in a thick, dark gravy built from nothing but the meat's own drippings and a little flour. There was no garnish. There was no herb sprinkled on top for a photograph nobody was taking. There was just steam rising off a bowl set down in front of a man who'd been in a field or a plant all day, and a house that smelled like it had been cared for since morning. That is not a small meal. That is an entire day of someone's love, condensed into something you could eat with a spoon. Number 12. Cabbage rolls immigrant enclaves across the Midwest and Northeast held on to this one hardest, straight through the 1970s. A head of cabbage, 9 cents a pound, blanched soft, then wrapped by hand around a mixture of ground beef, rice, and onion, dozens of them, rolled tight, packed into the crock standing on end, drowned in tomato sauce, and left to simmer for the better part of a day. Slow, exacting work, the kind nobody does anymore because nobody has to. Today, a restaurant calls it braised stuffed cabbage and charges $19 for 3 rolls. She made 30 in an afternoon and fed a family for 2 days on it. They knew things about patience that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 11. American chop suey New England factory towns claimed this one as their own, a name that borrowed from a cuisine it had nothing to do with. Slapped onto ground beef, elbow macaroni at 19 cents a bag, and canned tomatoes simmered together until the pasta went soft and the sauce clung to every ridge. It fed a family of 6 for less than $1.50 total some weeks. The name was wrong. The dish was not. This was not chop suey. This was survival wearing a borrowed name. In a kitchen where what mattered wasn't what you called dinner, it was whether there was enough of it. Number 10. Round steak with onion soup mixed nationwide, unglamorous, endlessly repeated. Round steak at $1.09 a pound, 1 packet of dry onion soup mix, a splash of water, nothing else. That was the whole ingredient list, and it was enough. The soup mix carried onion, salt, and a caramelized savoriness that would have taken her an hour of standing over a pan to build from scratch, and instead it came from a paper packet that cost 19 cents. She'd toss it in cold, straight from the freezer some mornings. No thawing, no ceremony, because the crock didn't care, and neither did she. By dinner time the steak had gone fork tender, sitting in a thin brown gravy that tasted like it had simmered all day. Because it had, there was no recipe card for this one in most houses. It lived in memory, passed along in a phone call or over a fence. Just the steak, the packet, a little water, that's it. No measuring. No timer beyond the workday itself. This is the dish nobody remembers by name and everybody remembers by taste, the exact flavor of a Tuesday in 1974, spooned over rice or mashed potatoes, because whatever starch was cheapest that week decided the rest of the plate. She was right. Everything she knew about stretching a $1.09 cut of meat into a meal that tasted like more, she was right about every bit of it. Number 9. Pork chops and scalloped potatoes. Rural Midwest kitchens, 1970s. Pork chops at 99 cents a pound, browned first in a hot skillet for the color and the crust, then laid directly on top of sliced potatoes, swimming in a cream sauce built from butter, flour, and milk. No can required, not for this one. She layered the potatoes thin, almost translucent, so the heat would move through evenly over the long hours ahead, and she knew that without anyone teaching her the physics of it. What came out wasn't 2 dishes. It was one, the potatoes gone rich and faintly smoky where the pork fat had settled into them, the edges of the meat falling apart at the touch of a fork, the whole thing bound together by hours she wasn't even home to witness. She didn't dirty 2 pots for this. She didn't need to. Everything that mattered about the meal happened in one place. Slowly, while she was somewhere else entirely, at a desk, behind a register, on her feet at a factory line. The chops didn't dry out. The potatoes didn't turn to mush. That balance, held for 7 or 8 unattended hours, wasn't luck. That was a woman who understood her equipment better than the men who manufactured it ever gave her credit for. Number 8. Boston-style baked beans. Crock Pot New England claimed the name, but by the 1970s this dish had crossed every state line and settled into kitchens that had never seen a Massachusetts winter. Dried navy beans at 15 cents a pound, soaked overnight in a bowl on the counter, then drained and dropped into the crock with molasses. A few strips of bacon laid on top like a blanket, a spoonful of mustard powder, and enough water to cover. Left alone for the better part of a day, not an hour, the beans went dark and glossy, swelling soft while the bacon rendered down into the sauce around them, and the kitchen filled with something sweet and smoky that had nowhere to go but into the walls of the house itself, into the curtains, into memory. This wasn't a side dish stretched thin to fill a plate. On the nights money was tightest, this was dinner, full stop, ladled hot over a slice of toast, because bread was cheaper than another can of anything. And nobody at that table felt like they were eating less. They felt like they were eating something someone had spent all day making sure they'd love, because she had, even if she was 30 miles away at a desk when the beans actually finished cooking. That is not going without. That is care with the timing worked out in advance. Number 7. Chicken cacciatore Italian American neighborhoods in the Northeast, where the dish had been carried over an ocean generations earlier and then quietly rebuilt for a suburban kitchen and a 9-to-5 schedule that no grandmother in the old country ever had to work around. Chicken thighs, 49 cents a pound, because thighs were still the cheap cut then, browned quickly in oil for the color, then left to simmer for hours with canned tomatoes, sliced bell pepper, a scatter of dried oregano, and whatever red wine was already open from the night before. Never bought special for the dish, always just whatever was on hand. It was a dish with real history behind it, hunter-style cooking from the Italian countryside, built originally around whatever the hunt brought home and whatever grew wild nearby. It survived the crossing into a crock pot on a Formica counter in Providence or Newark without losing what made it worth keeping in the first place. This was not a shortcut, and it wasn't a translation that lost something in the process. This was a grandmother's recipe, adjusted for a daughter who no longer had 4 hours to stand at a stove, but still refused, flatly, to let the dish disappear from her family's table just because her schedule had changed. Number 6. Poor man's beef bourguignon suburban dinner party culture, mid-1970s, when Julia Child had made French cooking suddenly desirable on television, and nobody's grocery budget had caught up to the ambition she'd inspired. Stew beef instead of a proper braising cut, cubed and browned in batches so the pan wouldn't crowd, a jug of red wine at $1.99 instead of anything with a French label she couldn't pronounce anyway, carrots cut thick, pearl onions from a frozen bag, a bay leaf if she had one. Then hours of low heat doing the work that a professional kitchen would have done with technique she'd never been taught in any formal sense, and never needed to be. What came out of that crock tasted unmistakably like the real thing. Deep, wine dark, the beef falling apart at the edges, the whole house smelling like something out of a restaurant she'd never actually been inside. Tonight a restaurant plates the same idea for $38 and calls it elevated, calls it authentic, puts a French accent mark somewhere on the menu to justify the price. She built it for under $4 total on a Saturday, timed around a load of laundry and a trip to pick up the kids. That is not a lesser version of anything. That is the exact same dish with the pretension boiled clean off it. Number 5. Ham with pineapple rings and brown sugar once, strictly holiday food. The centerpiece you built an entire Easter or Christmas table around. And by the middle of the decade, ordinary enough for a random Thursday in kitchens across the country. A ham studded all over with whole cloves pressed in by hand, ringed with canned pineapple at 29 cents a can and held in place with toothpicks, packed with brown sugar that melted down over hours into a glaze dark and sticky enough to coat the whole cut by the time it was done. The smell alone, drifting out under the front door by late afternoon, turned a Tuesday into something that felt like it mattered, like company was coming even when nobody was. That was the quiet trick of it. And it wasn't really about the ham at all. She didn't need a holiday to justify making something beautiful. She didn't wait for permission from a calendar to decide her family deserved cloves and pineapple and a glaze that took all day to build. She just decided the day deserved it, decided it on a Tuesday morning before work, and made it true by the time everyone sat down. That is not extravagance. That is a woman refusing to let ordinary mean less than it should. Number 4. Tamale Pie, Texas, and the Greater Southwest, born out of two food traditions meeting in one working-class kitchen where nobody was thinking about fusion cuisine. They were thinking about dinner. Cornmeal at 8 cents a pound, mixed with water and a little fat, and layered like a crust along the bottom and sides of the crock. Ground beef browned with chili powder and cumin poured in over it. Canned corn folded through for sweetness. The whole thing left to bake low and slow until the cornmeal set into something between a crust and a tamale that had given up its corn husk wrapper somewhere along the way. It wasn't authentic to any one place, and it never claimed to be. It was authentic to her table, to the ingredients she could actually afford that particular week, to a fusion nobody planned in advance, and everybody ate gladly once it hit the plate. This was not a compromise struck reluctantly between two cuisines that didn't belong together. This was a third one, entirely its own, built out of necessity and geography and whatever the pantry happened to hold, and it deserved so much better than being forgotten the way it has been. Number 3. Split pea soup with ham hock German and Scandinavian communities carried this one hardest, generation after generation. Though it spread everywhere, a ham bone was ever considered too good to throw out, which is to say, everywhere. Dried split peas at 12 cents a pound, poured straight into the crock with no soaking required, a leftover ham hock with just enough meat still clinging stubbornly to the bone, a chopped onion, a sliced carrot, a bay leaf if the jar wasn't empty, and hours upon hours of slow, patient cooking until the peas broke all the way down into something thick enough to stand a spoon in without it tipping. This was the last stop for a ham that had already fed the family once as a roast on Sunday and once again as scalloped potatoes on Wednesday. By the time it hit this pot, there was almost nothing left of it. A bone, some fat, a few stubborn shreds of meat clinging to the joint. And she still found a way to make it dinner, still found a way to make it taste like it deserved a place at the table. Nothing wasted. Not the bone, not the last shred of meat, not the afternoon it took simmering to get there. Number 2. Sloppy Joe with bologna and mashed rutabaga. This is the strangest one on the list, and maybe the most honest. Sloppy Joe with sliced bologna and mashed rutabaga, a documented recipe, printed and genuinely followed in real 1970s kitchens. A whole ring of bologna at 59 cents a pound, simmered intact in a crock alongside rutabaga, potato, and onion for most of a day, then fished back out at the end, sliced thin, and mashed right back down into the softened vegetables underneath it. The whole mixture turns savory and strange and somehow satisfying. It sounds absurd until you understand the arithmetic behind it. One package of bologna, ordinarily a lunch meat, stretched across an entire family's dinner, disguised as something heartier and more substantial than the ingredient list would ever suggest on its own. Nobody today would put this on a menu, would dare serve rutabaga mash with sliced bologna and call it anything but a joke. Nobody in 1974 was asking it to be elegant either. It wasn't trying to impress a guest or photograph well or earn a place in a glossy cookbook. It was asking to be enough food, stretched far enough, at a low enough cost, to get a family through one more week. And it was. That's the whole story of this dish, and it's not a small one. Number 1. Beef barley soup, farmhouse kitchens, coast to coast. Every decade this list has touched, and every decade before it too. A dish so old and so plain it barely registers as a recipe at all. Barley at 11 cents a pound. Whatever scraps of stew beef were left wrapped in butcher paper in the back of the freezer, a carrot gone slightly soft in the crisper drawer. An onion, water, salt, and hours. Nothing else. Nothing added for show. Nothing dressed up for anyone's benefit. This is the dish this entire list has been walking toward from the very first item. Not a single fancy ingredient in it, start to finish. Not a single wasted one, either. By the time it was ready, the barley had gone plump and tender, swollen to twice its size. The broth turned dark and rich from bones and scraps that most kitchens today throw straight in the trash without a second thought. She built an entire meal, filling and warm and enough for the whole family, out of things other people considered garbage. She was right. Everything she knew was right, and this soup is the proof of it, sitting in a bowl, asking nothing of you but a spoon and a little patience.